Hi, my name is Lydia Rhea. I'm a cellist, and I'm here to talk to you today about my learning process for Nadia Boulanger's 3 pieces for cello and piano. You might also see my dogs in the background. When Opus Illuminate first approached me about this project, I honestly did not know these pieces very well. I had never heard them performed live in a concert, and so I first went to recordings to be able to understand the piece a little bit better. Now, I did not listen to only one recording, and I made a specific note to not memorize how other people were playing the piece because I didn't want to just be a carbon copy of somebody else's interpretation, but I did want to get some inspiration for the phrasing and the tempi and things like that before I went into learning the notes myself. I also will note that every single time that I practiced this piece or was listening to recordings of it, I was looking at the score. I use an iPad most of the time now when I'm performing, and it's really helpful to be able to look at both the piano and the cello parts, especially in a piece like this where it is a very collaborative work, and it is a piece for cello and piano. It isn't a cello solo with accompaniment or anything like that. So I wanted to be able to understand what the piano is doing throughout the work. The next step that I did before I even started learning the notes myself was go through the work and mark down any translations of the French terms that Boulanger uses throughout the work that I wasn't already comfortable with. It's very common for French impressionistic and neoclassical composers such as Boulanger to use different terminologies to express what colors and feelings they are trying to evoke in their music, and oftentimes there are no specific tempo markings. This is very common in other composers such as Debussy and Ravel, and it's really important to understand the colors that they are trying to evoke through this language, and so I felt it was extremely important for me to be able to comfortably understand and interpret what those directions mean. So as soon as I had listened to a few recordings and also gone through and marked any translations that I needed, it was finally time for me to start actually learning the notes. It was really important for me just as soon as I started learning the notes to also go through and experiment with what sort of colors I thought I would want. That to me is something that string players can do through fingerings, and so I experimented a lot with what strings I thought I would want to play on, or what fingerings, what slides I thought would fit best in a certain situation, because French composers are so famous for the range of colors present in their music, and Boulanger is no exception. I was really fortunate that I was able to start having piano rehearsals pretty early on in the learning process of this piece with my amazing pianist, Jacob Bernhardt, who you will see in the recording. And it was really helpful for me, not because that the piano and the cello part were hard to fit together ensemble-wise or anything like that. Boulanger makes that part pretty easy on behalf of the performers, but more so because we had really interesting discussions, again, about color and what we thought this passage meant and how to bring out different nuances and different chord progressions that she uses in the piano part that are really interesting and really exemplify kind of the peak of French Impressionism and the neoclassicism that was starting to creep in there. And so that was a really interesting process for me because every single time we had a rehearsal, it then informed the fingerings that I was choosing and how I was choosing to play my part to best fit in with the piano. One of my favorite parts about learning a piece like this that doesn't have a ton of recordings of it and also isn't necessarily standardized repertoire, and so when you play it for somebody, they don't have in general like a set idea on what the tempo should be and like exactly what it should sound like and things like that, is that Jacob and I were experimenting especially with timings while we were recording. So the recordings that you see are generally like our 3rd or 4th take of each movement, and that's generally because, not that we had a disaster in one of the earlier takes, but because every single time we played it through, we were like, oh, you know what, I think I want to take more time here, or I really feel like we need to do this here to bring out this character here, and making choices to, play one part softer so that the forte could really come through, and things like that that really contribute to the overall arch of each piece. I also want to note that something that we definitely had to experiment with was our balance in the first movement, because the cello is muted the entire time, and that gives such a different timbre to the sound that the cello produces. And even though we were playing in a hall, of course my sound wasn't carrying as far as it would if I wasn't using a mute, and so that was a really interesting dimension of that particular movement that Jacob and I experimented a lot with, because I didn't want him to feel like he was playing soft, but we had to figure out that balance of being able to carry out this, because she has forte markings in it, so it shouldn't be soft the whole time, but that decision to have the piece be muted or have the cello be muted throughout that whole movement really gives it this element of like crying out but still being restrained somehow, and that was a really fun element, especially in the first movement, for us to work with. Now, the second movement, I think we tried to interpret more as almost a lullaby, really just a simple tune that I didn't want to over-embellish. I really just wanted it to be present and to speak for itself and the beautiful simplicity of the melody line that she creates there. And I just wanted it to, at the end of the movement, just kind of have this like, feeling. Like, that was nice. And that's kind of what we were going for in the second movement, and hopefully that comes across. The third movement is probably where we had our most debates in terms of the tempi, because we didn't want to take a tempo that was so fast at the beginning that the last part felt like it got away from us. I personally didn't want to play it in a way where I felt like it was frantic. I wanted it to be really joyous and almost dance-like. I didn't want it to feel like this like crazy like bull in a china shop kind of situation. So that was a really interesting thing for us to play with, because I wanted it to still be crisp and dance-like, but you know, have that element of like spunk to it without being completely just like manic, especially at the end where it's supposed to be even faster than it is at the beginning. And I personally found that if we started too fast, that element of like pure excitement and that rush to the end kind of gets lost a little bit. So I'd say we definitely experimented with tempo the most in the last movement because of those elements that Boulanger directs the performers to do in that movement. Overall, I really enjoyed working on this piece, mainly for the different colors that Boulanger gives the performers the freedom to work with. I find that to just be so quintessentially French, and it's a really fun thing to get to experiment with different colors, especially on the cello, just to be able to figure out what string you want to sing a particular melody on or phrase on, and the different vibratos and the different bow speeds especially. That's such a French thing, to be able to figure out how to control your bow speed in a way that you either get a really singing sound or really almost wispy sound, and all of those are elements that are present throughout this work. So I really enjoyed it. I hope if you work on this piece you also, or you found this video helpful and you also enjoy working on it. And I think that's all I have to say. So if you do choose to learn this piece, I hope you enjoy it, and good luck. Bye.